Welcome to AP lesson number 4 on creating a pay list to pay invoices. I'm currently in the AP Center screen and I want to pay a bunch of invoices. So I'm going to click on the check button on the toolbar. Now what we can do in here is create what's called a pay list, which is nothing more than a list of invoices that we want to pay. But before we click the Create Pay List button, we can limit the pay list to several different criteria. First of all, you can limit it to a certain checkbook. So if you're running multiple checkbooks through your system, you can select the invoices that were saved under one checkbook, but later on we could actually pay them under another checkbook or to a credit card account at the lower right of the screen. But in creating the pay list, we can also limit it to invoices that are paid by a certain date, limit it to a certain vendor by selecting the vendor account or selecting the vendor in the vendor lookup. We can limit it to a certain group of vendors, like our material supply vendors, for example. Or we can also limit the pay list to invoices related to a specific job number. And the job number was entered along with the AP invoice when we entered the invoice originally. But depending on the criteria that we set at the left side of the screen, when we select Create Pay List, it will then create a pay list of invoices that meet this criteria. And notice that we always want to try and take vendor discounts, so this is always checked on for us. And you'll see why as we look at the right side of the screen. You know what I'm going to do though is I'm going to go out into the future a little bit so that I get more invoices on this pay list. Now what you're looking at here are all the invoices that met the criteria at the left of the screen. I do want to make a note, however, about something, because Cobra's going to be very careful here. If more than one user has created a pay list on their own computer, then the invoices on their pay list will not show up here. So before you create your pay list, you may want to run this Clear Pay List button that will actually ask you if you want to clear the pay list and those of all other users. So you may want to say yes first, so that when you create your pay list, they all show up here on your pay list. So what this shows you underneath the pay list is how much all these invoices add up to, so that we can then begin the process of selecting what we want to pay. But before we do that, we can even click into the checkbook balance button to check the balance of that checkbook before we begin paying it. So now I'm back on my pay list. What I can do is begin authorizing what I want to actually pay. So even though all these invoices meet the criteria for payment, maybe we don't have all the money to pay them all, or we want to set a dispute on an invoice so that it shows up here and we don't pay that disputed amount. All of that kind of stuff can be done, and we can recreate our pay list at any time. But the idea is to get this authorized column and this authorized amount to be what you want before we actually print the checks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and highlight a bunch of invoices, or I could click on this Authorize All Invoices button too. I can do it either way. That'll authorize everything on the pay list for payment. Otherwise, if I wanted to come back and deauthorize something, maybe this particular invoice, we can double click on it and say, well, we really don't want to authorize it for payment at this time. Maybe there's a dispute, or you just don't want to pay it right now. So it takes it off of the authorized amount here at the bottom of the pay list here. So depending on how you want to authorize something, you can either select them or select all invoices and then deauthorize what you don't want to pay. So that's how you authorize payments. You can authorize partial payments on invoices. So maybe on this invoice we want to authorize a partial payment. We can double click on it and say I only want to pay, say, 500 of it. So you have all the control that you need to authorize what you want to pay. Now once we have done our authorizing, we're brought down to the bottom right part of the screen where it says this is your next check number, and this is in your running sequence of checks. So both AP and payroll are looked at, their individual check registers are looked at to give you the next available check number. You can override that obviously, but we try and not make you have to do that. So once we've authorized our checks and we're getting ready to pay them, we can pay them to an alternate checking account or even a credit card account down here by selecting it in this window. So if you want to do that and you want to set up credit card accounts, do click into the help system and type in credit card account for more information on how you want to do that. But let's pay this. If I'm ready to actually print the checks, I can click the print checks button, or if I want somebody else to look over this pay list and maybe authorize some more items, you can print this out. You can even exit this screen, and when you come back into it later, it's got everything there for you. So here, once I did get out of the screen, I do need to reauthorize what I want to authorize. So I said authorize everything. And now I'm going to double click in and just deauthorize a couple of invoices to get the amount down to where I wanted it. Excellent. Now I'm ready to print checks, so I will click on the print checks button. This builds a list of the AP checks in order, and they all have little printers by them, which means that they're ready for printing. Okay, and notice that the Gooden one from the invoice that we entered earlier includes the discount, so we're paying less that discount on Gooden's invoices. And you have a chance at this point even to click in at the last minute and see all the invoices that will be paid by that check, which is pretty cool. Now, if the number of invoices that is being paid by a check exceeds 36, or the normal number on our check stub, Cobra will inform you at the end of the check run that it's ready to print supplemental check stubs, or essentially print the rest of the invoices on white paper. So it will stop at that point, allowing you to fill your printer with white paper. Otherwise, it will print it to your normal reports printer if it's different than your check printer. So at this point, I can even select which checks I want to print, or I can click the select all checks, which highlights everything, and then when I begin printing them, it will mark them off with a check mark. So for purposes of demonstration, I don't have a printer attached, so I will just create a PDF file out of the results here. So you can see what happened. It printed all the checks and it checked them all off. But as what happens a lot of time when you're doing a large check run, maybe one or two checks are eaten up by your printer. So it's a simple matter of renumbering and reprinting just those checks. How you do that is you double click on the check that you need to renumber, and then it brings that check number down here, where then you can give it the next check number, and it renumbers it. So then it will redisplay it at the bottom of that checklist, and you can continue renumbering the eaten up checks with new check numbers, and then just reprint just those checks, which is really cool. So once you're done, you want to post your check run, which means I'm done with it. And at the posting, just like in payroll, actually creates the accounting records for the check run. And if you tried to exit the screen before you posted, you would be reminded to do that. So you can't goof it up. So now that we're done with the check run, let's take a look at an invoice that was paid. I'm going to select my Gooden supplier. I'm going to go into the status screen, and I'm going to see my paid invoice. I can see that by the status of paid that it was paid. And when I click into the view accounting records for that invoice, I can now see some vendor or some transaction type 2 records here that were created when I printed the check. So what I'm seeing here are what's going on with this invoice during its lifetime. And the type 2 records, I just resorted the list by clicking on transaction type. But the type 2 records then were created when I did the payment, as signified by the legend down here below the list. I can see when the check was paid, what check number, check date, and in this case I had a discount that was taken, so we're accounting for that discount as well. And as I scroll further to the right, I can also see that neither the general ledger was updated nor has the checkbook been updated with that check. Otherwise, the related information is displayed for me on the screen. So if I needed to problem solve this in the GL, I'd know which GL batch to look at, and I can go from there. And this is consistent throughout the entire program. AR, payroll as well have these kinds of controls. This ends the lesson on creating an AP pay list to pay invoices.